I'm Gina Griffiths, and I was born in 1942.
Margaret Ann Schneff, and I was born in 1940.
Robert Cooper Ellsworth, 1938.
And I'm Carolyn Schneff. I was born in 1933, and we're missing our big brother, DeLoss, who was born in 1931 and who recently passed away. Nonnie and Pappy were married in 1930, and they lived in a little, Nonnie called it a shack. I guess today's standards it was, a little wood house, which is now about Cloud Road and Ellsworth. It was on Ellsworth. It didn't have an indoor plumbing or bathroom, and so it was really like camping out. And I don't know how long they lived there before Pappy built a bathroom for Nonnie. And he said it was one of the first indoor bathrooms of any house in Queen Creek. And when I was born in 1933, they were on their way into the hospital in Mesa, which was a long ways away because there weren't any paved roads between Queen Creek and Mesa. And by the time they got to Grandma Cooper's house, Nonnie's mother, at Baseline and Cooper Road, she was ready to have me, or I was ready to come into this world. And so I was delivered by my Grandma Cooper at her house on the southwest corner of Cooper and Baseline Road. As I was telling Parker one day about where I was born, I said I was born at Cooper and Baseline at my grandma's house, and he stopped for a minute and then he said, "Were you really born at the Circle K?" So times have really changed since 1933 as far as growth and the valley goes. DeLoss was born a little over 2 years before I was. I'm not sure where he was born. I remember Nonnie saying he was born at a midwife home in Mesa, where they, like a maternity home. I don't believe they had a hospital then in Mesa. It was just, if they did, it was just a real small place. DeLoss was a very bright little boy, and he always excelled in everything very early. I was the one that had to do all the work.
Oh.
Because he was too busy to be
Woe is me.
the boss.
You were always babysitting.
He was Nonnie's favorite.
He was that.
I thought
And she started him to school a year earlier than his birthday was in February. So he started his school early. But then, after he got in school, he knew so much more than all those other Queen Creek kids that they skipped him up to another grade. So he had a hard time socially all through school because he was 2 years ahead of what he should have been.
Well, and physically he was little,
And
wasn't he?
Yeah, he was small. And I remember when he went into high school as a freshman, he was just a little kid and he wanted to play football so bad. And so he started taking a whole bunch of vitamins. He went to the drugstore and had a whole bunch of vitamins he was taking. And Pappy looked at him and he said, "You might as well put manure in your shoes for all the good that's gonna do you."
Well, I think it's important to realize then, you understand how disappointed Nonnie and Pappy was when I come along after they lost. But while I was growing up, I knew I had an older brother, but I didn't see him very much.
We did.
He was gone. He was off to studying at Cornell or somewhere else, and I can remember a life with my sisters and how they were spoiled by the parents and things like that. But I never did know DeLoss. I liked him. We got along good. We were good friends, but we had a good association. But it just wasn't, we never were real close.
Well, DeLoss was 7 years older,
7
7 or 8 years older than Bob. They-
Physically, he was. Mentally, he was probably 20 years older.
My memory of DeLoss was he was in college. He started college when he was 16. And so he's 10 years older than me. So I don't have a lot of memories of DeLoss except him getting in some trouble. And Nonnie and Pappy going after him. And then Carolyn got married when I was 10.
I was 8. Yeah.
So as far as memories of them, I remember more after, like Carolyn and Max were married, and with the little kids, Marlene and they were at the house all the time. Marlene and Larry, especially, and Kara, and 2 years.
One of my earliest memories of DeLoss is I loved Rancho Alegre and I loved to go up there, but we were up there and DeLoss decided when he was, I think, 17, he was going to become a professional cowboy. He was going to become a bronc rider. And so he went off and joined the rodeo circuit for the summer. Well, I think it was early on in the summer probably, but he got bucked off of his bronco and kicked him, and
It was the 4th of July.
he
It
came,
was like,
there was a long road that came down into Rancho Alegre, and I really have vivid memories for some reason of DeLoss walking down that road with his saddle slung over his shoulder. He could barely walk. He was all bruised up, and that was the end of his rodeo career.
Yeah, it didn't take him long to
didn't
feel
take him long to realize that there were better things. And then it was after that he kind of straightened his life up and decided he'd go to BYU, then go on a mission.
my memories
I
of
think.
Bob, or Bob and his buddies, he had quite a posse. There was Donnie Cloud, Claire Edwards, Don and Daryl, who else? But those boys were,
My chauffeur was George Nelson.
George Nelson.
They were in trouble.
They were in a lot of trouble, but they just were they just found things to do. So
I bought my first car when I was 15, so I didn't have a chance to get a driver's license, so George was my chauffeur.
you bought it,
Yeah, I sure did.
did you? Did
I
you?
bought it with the money that I'm raising calves for Uncle Lawrence.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. We drove to Chandler to high school, and it was kind of uneventful. There were no big things. It just, I remember later on, Pappy bought me a 55 Chevy,
I remember that car a lot.
Mhm.
and I gave the other one that I had to have Retta. As far as DeLoss, he was very active in politics in Arizona. He was, I think, he was Speaker of the House and President of the Senate both. Then Senator Goldwater called him to be his administrative assistant. I can remember going to a luncheon, and DeLoss had given me some buttons to sew on from the Senate on my sport coat. Barry Goldwater introduced me and his brother Bob. And he said, these are DeLoss' brother and my brother, and they're the two that went straight.
I don't have many memories of Carolyn being at home. She's been married almost my whole life.
And hers.
And I was very young when she and DeLoss both left home, and so I don't remember them at home having any home life.
June
with
and
them at
Bob and
all.
I were all raised, it was like 2 separate families. And Nonnie used to say that. She says, I had 2 families.
Yeah.
The 2 older ones, and they were gone, and then the 3 younger ones. And we were almost raised as a separate, they were never at home.
My early recollections of Bob is just how much he drove Nonnie crazy because he teased Marg and I all the time, and we were always crying and telling her to tell Bob to leave us alone, and especially when we'd go on trips and we wouldn't be very far out of town without Bob heckling us. And
And I remember Bob decided he was gonna be a rodeo star too. I remember him wanting to go rodeo on Sunday, and Pappy would say, go ahead, if that's what you wanna do. Did that.
You wanna hear that story?
Yeah, you wanna hear tell me the real story now.
I was to a rodeo on a Sunday, and I knew Judy was home with her kids
This was after you were married.
after we were married, and I made up my mind before I ever wrote my last calf that I was going to quit. So after I roped the calf, I rode out of the arena. I was in Benson, Arizona, and I got in my truck and drove home. And to this day, I've never been to a rodeo on Sunday since.
good for you.
Good job.
Do I get a star?
You did more than that.
Go ahead.
When I was only about 15, Nonnie and Pappy had gone up to the ranch for the summer, and they had loaded up a pickup with sideboards on it full of furniture, and left Delos and we had something going on at school or something, and we were to drive up there and take the furniture. Well, the only way to get to the ranch there was no road from Payson up onto the rim where the ranch is. We had to go to Sholo and then come all the way back from Sholo on the rim road. So it was
a long day.
It was a long ways.
Bad road.
And the morning, Delos and I were supposed to leave. Delos had been up all night doing whatever he was doing. And he
wasn't in church.
Over, and he couldn't stay awake to drive. And so he said, "Sis, you're gonna have to drive." Well, it was 6-shift pickup loaded with furniture, and I drove all the way to Sholo, up Salt River Canyon. I didn't even have a driver's license. I was only 15 years old. And Pappy just nearly...
Did he? I was gonna say, did they ever find out?
Oh, yeah, I told them. I told Nonnie.
It's a wonder Delos survived.
In Delos's defense, not having him here with us, but he didn't like to talk about that part of his life. Once he became religious, he was very, very religious, and he didn't really appreciate having to bring it up or talk about it very much, because I think it was just something in his life he didn't want to think about very much.
Yeah.
Can I tell you something about Bob? Bob was the prankster. We never knew what Bob was going to do. And I remember specifically one day, and I don't know why, he was going to run away from home. I wasn't very old. And they couldn't find, we came home from church and he was gone and couldn't find him. And of course, Nonnie's just having a conniption fit. Well, it went on, and finally he was out, we found him, he was out hiding in the irrigation ditch and just laughing it up.
Well,
do you remember that?
the funniest part of that story is he left a note and said, "I've run away."
It didn't do any good.
What were you running away from?
Well, I just always thought they treated you two little girls the best. And no, I don't even remember. I don't remember that. But I tell you what I can remember. I can remember these two young ladies here whining because Nonnie would have something for them to do every Saturday. If she didn't have anything for them to do, they had to shine the chandeliers, and they hated that. I bet Mark doesn't have any chandeliers in here.
No, not that I have to stand up, we had to shine. But Bob, Nonnie was bound and determined Bob was gonna play the piano. And he couldn't sit still. He got itchy when he sat there and tried to practice, and he just couldn't. So he decided that maybe he'd be able to play the accordion. So they got him an accordion, but then the accordion hurt his feet because he had to hold it. So his musical abilities never got developed fully but Nonnie tried. She really tried to get him to play the piano, but he didn't.
I like to have a nickel an hour back for every dollar she spent on me trying to teach me something like that music and elocution lessons.
Did you take elocution too?
Oh, I did,
Wow.
yes.
You took elocution.
As I remember growing up, there was a well and a ditch and a little place we could swim. And we had a grape arbor. It was like an arbor with grapevines growing over it for shade. And that's where we put cots at night and slept outside in the summertime because it was too hot to sleep in the house. It was common then to sleep outside in the summertime. And I remember we had mosquito netting, they called it, kind of the netting that we put over our beds to keep the being bit by mosquitoes. At that place, and Bob probably remembers too, I don't know how old he was before they built a new house. They had a small dairy behind it where they milked 7 or 8 cows every day. And then Pappy worked on the farm with his brothers. And so it was kind of a nice, simple life, but it was probably ideal in a lot of ways. We had some goats, and I think someone was telling the story of the goats, Juna.
Yes, Pappy used to tell the story about how they had saved and saved to buy a new car. And they got a new car, and he looked out one morning and the goats were climbing up the trunk and sliding down the hood, and then they'd go around and slide. Pappy didn't have a great love for goats ever. He said they'd eat everything that wasn't nailed down, and so that was always a funny story I remember Pappy telling about that house.
Well, when I was born, during the years right after I was born, the country was in a big depression, and Pappy said that he grew ducks, and he would sell the ducks. He'd take them into Phoenix and sell them to the Chinese restaurant, and that's what they used for money during that time because everything was so depressed. They didn't have any really cash flow or income, and so he, with the dairy and the food they grew and the ducks for a little bit of income, that's what they lived on during the Depression.
They were pretty self-proficient too. I mean, they didn't really rely on any. They took care of themselves.
They grew beef.
Their own
They
vegetables.
had pigs. And vegetables, grew vegetables. Broccoli, cauliflower, carrots. Remember all the carrot farmers? And
Yes. I remember planting a lot of carrots and growing them.
potatoes,
A lot of potatoes, cabbage,
Broccoli. I remember
cauliflower,
broccoli.
broccoli.
sweet potatoes.
I remember walking down the rows with cutting the sticks off the tamarack trees to plant the plants for broccoli and for cauliflower. You set out plants and a group of Mexican, Spanish people would plant it, and that's probably all learned to speak Spanish.
Going back again to that first little house, it was filled with mice, and Nonnie was petrified, scared clear to death of mice. And I remember one day I walked in, and I was probably only 5 or 6 years old, and she was standing on top of the kitchen table, and she handed me a spoon or knife or something, and she said, "You get that mouse and get it out of here." She had spilled some honey in the cupboard the night before, and there was a mouse, a live mouse stuck in the honey in the cupboard. And so I had to get the mouse, and I thought it was fun. I just took the mouse and took it outside. And I've never really been that afraid of mice, but she was
I am.
absolutely petrified of
I'm
mice.
terrified of mice. I think that Nonnie inbred that in us.
I like dead ones.
Say back to the early days of Queen Creek in the 30s, there was no, it was, like I said before, there was a long ways to the grocery store, long ways to town. And so the Ellsworth brothers had their own store and own gas station. And so all the hired hands, I guess it was like the company store that you hear the songs about, but they would get paid in this Ellsworth script, and then they had no place to spend it but at the grocery store. So I think the Ellsworth brothers made out okay on that.
It's probably illegal today. You couldn't do that today.
Also, they had their own meat packing house and feedlot, and they would feed cattle and get their beef, ground beef, and there were no inspectors, nothing, no regulation like we have now. But that was an important part. It fed a lot of Spanish people. The store was at the corner of Ellsworth and Ocatilla.
Gas station store.
Gas station, store,
And the
oil
feedlots.
company. The feedlot was straight down Ocatilla, a half a mile on both sides of the road.
But I guess I misspoke about them spending their money, because in the late 30s probably, Dory's moved to Queen Creek, a Dory family, and they put in a bar. And the bar was right across the street from the store. And that was kind of the hangout for the inactive members and the other members of the community that go hang out at the bar.
It all, Queen Creek, Ellsworth Brothers Farm started, the way Uncle Leo and my dad, Pappy, explained it to me was that Uncle Leo was working for the Valley Bank, which was a major bank, and they repossessed a lot of that farmland from Rittenhouse, the Mr. Rittenhouse. And the railroad siding is called Rittenhouse siding. We used to ship cattle and sheep out of the corrals out there close to the Schneff farm. And they started with that. And Uncle Leo put all his money together. Uncle Lawrence was a butcher in Mesa. And he had saved up a little money, and he threw in with him. And him and Uncle Leo started it. And when Pappy came back from his mission, he went to Northern Arizona University. And Uncle Leo and Uncle Lawrence talked him into coming back and going to work at the farm before he graduated. So that's how they all three started the farm. And I can remember them saying that they could drill a well. They'd buy that section of ground from the state one at a time, and they could drill a well and plant 160 acres of vegetable and get all the money back the first crop. And so with that kind of a program and the packing shed and facility, they grew and prospered and built kind of an empire.
At one time I read where they were farming like 15,000 acres. I mean, it just grew and grew and grew.
I think the big thing about growing up in Queen Creek was during potato season, that was always, everybody worked.
Hard.
Everybody. Nonnie and Pappy both worked. I babysit the young girls while they were gone, fixed lunch. And I wasn't very old, 13, 14, but I remember carrying Marg around lugging her around on my hip all day while Nonnie and Pappy were both working in potatoes. Bob had the concession stand where he sold pop. I remember one day he couldn't count the money. He had so much money coming in from pop at the potato shed that he was having a hard time counting it. And he picked up a dollar bill and blew his nose on it to the side. And Bill Workman was standing there and he said, "When you get through with that money," he said, "I think I'll take it and I can clean it off." And so, but that was to keep Bob. I think Bob made a lot of money doing that because I think Pappy bought all the pop and candy bars, and Bob got all
The first job I remember, Pappy, after Bob had to go work doing other things, and I sold the pop,
Yeah,
June and I,
sold
and
pop.
that was my first job.
Yeah.
There wasn't vending machines.
That's when Pappy started buying it, was when they
Yeah, he made you pay for it, right?
But everything stopped for that 6 weeks or 2 months where they harvested potatoes because that's all that went on from daylight to dark every day. And then usually after the harvest, they'd have a big dance for all the workers and the Mexican guys that were working, and the whole town came and had a big celebration. And then we would go up to the sheep ranch where they had already driven the sheep up there and spend the rest of the summer at the sheep ranch. So it was really a pretty good memorable life that we had.
It was.
When Marg and I were talking about a memory that we both had yesterday and that we think was probably one of the favorite things we did was to go up, this picture here of Pappy counting the sheep coming across the bridge. And that was a big thing. We would always take cousins and everybody go up to the Salt River in a picnic and would cook out over a campfire and spend the night. And when they drove the sheep across, and Pappy would count the sheep and make sure they hadn't gotten lost along the trail. But that was always a fun time of the year when we could go up to the bridge. What was the Blue Point?
Sheep bridge.
We called it the Sheep Bridge.
Tell
They
them how
tore
you-
it down.
That's not there now.
Say, how did you count the sheep?
You count all the legs and then you divide by 4.
That's how you know how many sheep you have. Bob used to, how many times did you go up the sheep trail with the
I went on the
sheep herders?
first time when I was 13. I remember Nonnie crying. She thought I was too young, and Pappy said, "No, let him go."
Because it was a big,
And they took me at Blue Point. After they counted the sheep across, that's right here on Salt River, not very far. Then you go clear on over to Tunnel Creek. Then you go up through the canyons and over through the sea
riding
arches
horses.
and Pleasant Valley, and then up on top of the rim. And
How long did it take you?
take about 5 weeks. Have a Campero was the one that took care of the camp, and usually there were 2 bands. And I remember the main foreman for the herd for years, a herder named Julio Contreras.
Yeah.
And I'd help Julio count them. I got to thinking I was a pretty big shot. Because he'd count them, and then I'd make a knot. Every time they get 100, he'd yell, "Cuenta," and I'd make a notch. And then we'd get through, we'd count them and see if we were short. But you always put a marker for every 100 head. A black one or a bell or something, so you know. And the herder would count the markers. So, and Julio would do the counting. And then when we get through, we'd find if we had a cut or not. And it was bad country to go through because there's a mile-wide stretch that the Forest Service has painted, rocks painted for you to follow. You had to stay in those boundaries. But a band would make a cut and go up and get away, and then we'd have to look for them. I can remember right after Judy and I was married, we had a bad cut, and I went up there looking for them, up in the Bradshaws. And I'd been up there 3 days, and I brought them back, and I put them in a corral there at the Doses Ranch. You know where that is? When you go up on the rim right there, when you get to
You're
Sunflower.
talking about
Sunflower. And I put them in there. I went back I rode on into Sunflower to call Judy, because I knew she'd be worried. And she said, "Okay, all right." She wasn't even worried at all. She didn't know. Oh no, he made it.
I remember when Bob was real small and they were working sheep in a corral out at Queen Creek, and Julio had a dog, and he would yell at that dog, and the dog was trained to work sheep, so Julio didn't have to do much, just yell at the dog, and he'd round the sheep up and drive them in. But he would yell at the dog and give him commands in Spanish. And Bob and I were standing there on the fence watching him, and pretty soon Bob turned to me and he said, "I didn't know dogs spoke Spanish."
That's all they speak.
That's your.
I can tell you a lot of stories on that sheep trail. The Indian cowboys that worked for Bernard Hughes up there at the Diamond Ranch at there by Sunflower. They would always steal them. They like to eat that lambs, mutton. So we'd save back some wethers. You know what a wether is? That's
An old sheep.
yeah, that's a castrated
One that's gonna
sheep.
die anyway.
And then you take them up there and give them to them, the herders. And they didn't stop it. If they'd find those cuts, they'd go back there and kill one until they were all gone. They'd eat them all.
How many sheep in a band? How many?
About 1,500.
So you had a
We
total
try to
of
keep it under
3,000?
1,500. Yeah, we had about 32,
That's a lot of little
3,300
sheeps.
sheep. And I can remember riding back and forth between the bands, and having them count them. And
How many times
I
did you
remember
do the
the
trail?
I don't know, quite a few.
I remember one year that Aramuspis had a sheep herd right up by us. They were a family from Mesa and they had sheep. Anyway, one year they had a bad lightning storm and the lightning struck the sheep and killed they were part of our herd, part of Aramuspis, and they were kind of huddled and killed 200 or 300 of them, it seemed like that time. Do you remember
I
that
used to
story?
could show you
Bob?
that tree, but I don't know if I can find it now or not.
But they
When it
killed
struck
all
that
these
tree,
sheep and
It sucked the wool up,
Oh, God.
and the tree still had the wool in it. And
It did.
that's the truth.
It's true. It's a true story.
Yeah.
the funny part about that story, if there was a funny part, was the Aramuspis were good religious people. I think they were Catholic. And
Basques.
he told Dad he knew that he was a religious man, but would it be all right if he had the priest come up and bless our sheep, the herds? And so he had somebody come up and bless the herds so that they'd be protected for the rest of the summer. So
There's something that ought to be told here for history. When Elder Brothers bought this sheep outfit from Bill Ryan, the Mexicans had nicknamed it Rancho Alegre. And Alegre, I'm sure you know, means happy. Well, after I got to inquiring, the reason it was happy is because they had a still up there where they made whiskey. And they had an area right there where they would tag the bands would all come off the rim and tag them as they made the trail back down here for the winter in the valley. And that's where they made their Who Hit John and celebrated, and then they nicknamed that ranch Rancho Alegre. And I knew right where that still was. Part of it was still there. And one of the herders showed me all about it, but if that would I try not to tell very many people that story.
I don't think I
Wouldn't be
ever
good
heard
for-
that story.
Pappy was a general authority. It wouldn't be good for him to own Rancho Alegre.
It's a hooch ranch.
But
it was a happy place, so I love that ranch.
that's how it got its name. You know where Young is, the Pleasant Valley, where I'm talking about. They had a store there, and we had to ride in there to get the supplies. And Pappy said, now when you go to Pleasant Valley, you go right over there to Hoagland's and get your supplies and come back. Don't be monkeying around in there. He said, you're a Mormon, you're a sheep man, and a Republican, and they hate all three. I can remember that. He was very emphatic.
I just loved the surroundings. It was so peaceful and quiet, and the elk would come down into the meadow at night, and it was just very serene, just kind of a place where you felt safe from the world. And
Did you tell the story about you and Bob elk hunting?
One summer up at the ranch, I was about 12, and Bob must have been about, how old were you, Bob? 5 years younger than me. And we both had 22s, and the whole meadow at Rancho Alegre was filled with elk. Just a big herd of elk. And so Bob and I decided we were gonna go get us an elk. And we snuck around in the mountains for all the way around so we could get a good view of the meadow. And by the time we lowered our guns to shoot us an elk, 22 of all things, we were both shaking so bad from buck fever that we couldn't have hit anything. As soon as we fired the guns, the elks took off. So they were safe with us. We didn't even come close, did we, Bob?
That was the last elk hunt we ever went on.
We really had buck fever.
We were part of, it wasn't actually down in Rancho Alegre. Where were the big water tanks that Pappy built that one summer?
They were closer to the ranger station down north of the ranger station.
Anyway, we were up there and they were building these big water tanks, and I think their little Johnny Freestone was there, and Marg and I, but we were playing cowboys and Indians, and I happened to be Indian, I guess.
The first mistake is we had BB guns.
And Mark had a baby gun and she shot me, and it hit me right below this eye. And she just got in a lot of trouble, I remembered, with Nonnie and Pappy for shooting at me to begin with. But
It
we
ruined my
thought,
life.
we never did see the BBs, so we just figured that it must have hit my bone and bounced out or something. So, but after Jerry and I got married, I went to the dentist, and he was doing a full set of x-rays, and there was this little round circle that showed up right here in my cheek, and the doctor says, I don't know what's wrong. You've got this little circle. What is that? And I says, I don't know. He says, well, maybe it's my machine. So we went back and checked the x-ray machine. There wasn't anything there. And he says, do you have anything? Were you ever hurt or anything? And I says, well, my sister shot me with a BB gun when I was 8 years old. And so we started feeling, and we could feel that BB up in here. And so they had to do surgery on it and remove the BB after all those.
I remember about Rancho Alegre is that, of course, we didn't have running water, had an outhouse.
Yeah.
And when we go up there, Nonnie wasn't crazy about it. And then on Saturday night, we'd get a big tub of water, and all of us take a bath in
Front of the
the front of the
fireplace.
fireplace. So,
We didn't call it an outhouse.
what did we
It was
call
a
it?
2-ring circle.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there was catalog
Sears
pages.
catalog. But we didn't have, there was no electricity down there, so it was pretty primitive. Our refrigerator, I remember, was this big box Pappy had up in the tree, and they'd put ice. They'd have to go get ice and replenish it, and so.
We had a donkey up there one summer,
Yeah.
and we named him Albert Smith. And Pappy, when Pappy heard us calling him Albert Smith, he got really upset with us because the president of the church's name was George Albert Smith at that time.
How come you named it that?
I don't know, but we had to change its name. I don't know what we changed it to, but we couldn't call it Albert Smith anymore. The Ellsworth brothers brought their sisters and husbands out there and put them on a half a section or a section of farmland. And so by the time I got in grade school, we were mostly cousins. And in the Queen Creek School, I think there was like 11 kids in my class, and 6 of us were first cousins. And so it was pretty intimidating to get teachers to teach, because we had a tendency to gang up on them a little bit. But we weren't bad kids. We were all good students, and had a lot of fun in grade school, a lot of association with cousins.
I have really fond memories of Pappy's sisters. They were all so loving and sweet and kind and wonderful cooks. And Pappy loved his sisters. He was very affectionate and always wanted to make sure that they were taken care of and happy, but I have good memories of all of my aunts on Pappy's side. Aunt Violet was the oldest. Violet was the oldest. Aunt Grace, she was kind of the boss of the bunch. She was a business head. And
Daryl used to call me Gracie.
yeah, we used to say Mark's the Aunt Grace of our family.
Not that smart.
And then who was next? Aunt Blanche?
Aunt Ramola.
Oh, Aunt Ramola. And Aunt Blanche.
Aunt Lona.
Aunt Lona.
And Aunt Zelda
and
was
Aunt
the
Zelda
baby.
was the baby.
Is that all of them?
And they were big ladies. They probably would have
That's
lived
where the
longer.
term Ellsworth hips came into play.
They were large, but they were very kind and sweet ladies.
The whole family eventually moved out there, didn't they?
Yes. The Ellsworth brothers started it, and then as it developed, they gave land or sold land to all the family. Every one of them, except Aunt Violet. I don't think Aunt Violet ever was there, but all the other sisters and brothers, and Uncle Carl never did. He was the fire chief at Mesa, and then he died, and so he wasn't involved, but Nolan was his son, and he farmed. I was born in Mesa Southside Hospital, 1938. I was the first Mexican born into the family.
You just got treated like one sometimes.
Spanish.
Hispanic. Bob had to work a lot harder than we did because he was the boy.
I had a really good association with my uncles, Lawrence and Leo. And when I was very small, I remember going with them all day, staying all day. And we'd go to the company store, and I might add that everyone that worked on the farm was paid with Ellsworth Brothers script. And
With little coins.
little coins, and I have a copy of some of the receipts at home in a safe place, but they're getting kind of brittle, where you can buy a pop for 2 pennies. And I don't remember how old I was. I was very small. But I remember wanting to go with him, and he would say I was too small.
With Pappy.
Pappy. And so after lunch, he'd lie down and rest for a few minutes. And while he'd go to sleep, I'd tie a string between my belt and his, so it'd wake me up when he left. He would tell that story. That's the way I remember him. Remember it.
I remember Pappy telling about Bob and how he liked to work on the farm. And he was with Pappy out in the field, and there was irrigation tubes going. And Pappy was out in the field irrigating, and Bob and Donnie Cloud, he left them in the car, or the pickup, while he was there. And he looked up, and the pickup was going down the road, and he couldn't see anybody driving. But then he noticed, I think it was Bob or Donnie Ones, driving the pickup, and it really worried him, and he went running after it. They weren't big enough to put their foot on the pedals to drive, but one of them was steering, the other one was down working the foot pedals to drive, and they were driving down through the field. They were just little tiny guys, probably 4 or 5 years old, out driving through the field.
We were real good though, very unusual to do something like that. Well, I remember the house, I remember swimming in the ditch as little kids, the irrigation ditch, and cooling off. It was hot, but it wasn't unbearable hot. My memories of my youth wasn't the heat, it was a fun time, it was good. We did a lot of things together as a family, and I'm grateful for that family of cousins and association that we had. And I remember it being quite isolated, and we had our own orchestra, and on Saturday in one of the warehouses that have a dance, and we had our own baseball teams and things like that. So it was kind of a small area and self-sufficient. Everyone liked each other most of the time, and I can remember I remember Aunt Lona playing the piano and Pappy the banjo and going to the dances and all the farm help and everybody there and having a good time.
Another memory I remember living in Queen Creek was Pappy decided to form a band, and I don't know how that all came about. Pappy was a good banjo player, and he worked his way through college playing a band, and he had a group called Uncle Donald and his Ducks, and they adopted that name for their band. But it was Max Schneff played the drums, and Jackie Schneff played the trumpet.
They were good.
But they were pretty well known, especially in the church, for the different stake functions and dances and things.
I think one thing we need to talk about maybe is the singing cousins, and you can fill us in a little more of that.
There were 6 cousins that were all within a year or two of the same age. And we all went all through school together. Well, when we were in first, second grade, Orva Freestone was the school teacher in Queen Creek, and she taught tap dancing. And so she started us all tap dancing. And then Maud Crandall moved to Queen Creek, and she started coaching us singing. And we sang close 3-part harmony, the 6 of us. There was Danelle Cloud Tarwater. There were the Nelson girls, Dorothy and Martha Nelson, Joanne Pugh, Naira Ellsworth, and myself. And so for several years, we sang someplace nearly every week. We sang a cappella 3-part harmony.
They were really good.
And we blended really well, like families usually do. Our blend was real well. First they called us the country cousins, then we kind of dropped and decided we were a little more sophisticated than that. We were the singing cousins.
Then she taught a quartet that I was in, and we won a lot of awards and stuff when I was in high school. And what do we call ourselves?
I don't know what you were called, but it was
John Wayne Morris, me, Joyce Brown, and Daisy Lou Morris. And we had a quartet. And we won all kinds of talent shows, and we were bang, you know. But Carolyn was our coach. Out in Queen Creek, there was our house that I was raised in, and then I don't remember a lot of other houses around it. Down Ocotillo was a row of houses that the farm help lived in, and they were really minimal. They were just not much to them.
Uncle Leo had a house at Ocotillo.
Oh yeah, and Uncle Lawrence had a house.
And Uncle Lawrence lived south of us a little ways.
Was that before or after? I mean, we hadn't built the red brick house?
That was before the red brick.
Was it?
Yeah.
So they were out there when they built the red
And
brick house.
then they had some other help houses along Ocotillo on the south side. And then during the 40s, they went ahead and built more houses along there that they eventually sold. A lot of those houses are still.
Nonnie's siblings were close. I remember going things at the home on Baseline
You do?
and Cooper.
Nonnie's family, there were a lot of boys.
And they were on.
Yes.
They were always
Delinquent.
doing something they shouldn't be doing.
They were in trouble in Gilbert all the time.
And Gilbert was just a small town, and they tell the story about going to the theater, and right next door to the theater was a cafe, and one of them going in and hollering, "Fire in the restaurant," and everybody in theater started running out, and there wasn't any fire. They were just doing stuff like that all the time.
Uncle Morris.
Nonnie's siblings are Uncle Morris,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Uncle John.
Uncle Ed,
Well, I got it.
start over.
Ed, Morris, John, and
Most,
Paul, and
most,
Uncle
Uncle
Mose,
Mose
Uncle Mose, and then
Uncle
Jess.
Jess.
and
Did you
Jim.
do Jim?
that was the brothers.
Yeah, Jim.
The sisters are Retta,
Uncle Jim and Jess.
Irene,
And then
Dutch, and
There was
Nonnie.
4 girls and 6 boys. How many boys?
The first funeral I
7.
ever remember going to was Grandma Cooper's.
they were very athletic, all the boys. Uncle Mose had a scholarship to go to Northern Arizona play football during his college. Nonnie told me that the first time he combed his hair was when he graduated from college.
None of the boys were involved in Queen Creek with Nonnie and Pappy.
No.
Aunt Dutch and Aunt Retta both moved out there and worked, but
Pappy's first experience with the Cooper boys was he went to high school or school in Peoria, and they played Gilbert in football and sports. He said they didn't have any grass. They played with rocks and gravel and football.
they didn't have any padding.
And
They'd get on the line to line up for a play, and the Cooper boys would pick up dirt and throw it in their eyes.
Nice guys. They were tough.
they called, I'll tell you, they called Pappy's team Orya, because they knocked the pee out of him every time they went.
I think Nonnie's family probably the one that's the most outstanding that we all, well, Aunt Retta, and I remember going to her house in Mesa. They lived in Mesa on 2nd Avenue, and she'd always bake cakes, and we'd go in there and drink Pepsis and eat chocolate cake, and Uncle Tom would always hide money in the cake and see which kid could find the money. Do you remember that? Yeah, so we grew up eating lots of Aunt Retta's chocolate cake and pies, and eventually they all moved to Queen Creek, Nonnie's sisters.
None of her brothers ever did.
None of her brothers ever did, but
And Irene never did.
Aunt Retta was a
Postmaster.
she worked worked in a laundry.
She worked in laundry
in
forever,
Mesa.
worked hard.
Uncle Tom never could support them very well, and so she worked in a laundry. And Pappy felt sorry for her and Nonnie, and they wanted her to have a better life, so she moved to Queen Creek and eventually became the postmistress
I
out
think
there.
Nonnie and Pappy did a lot to support her and her family over the years
And,
and took care of them.
Uncle Tom worked for Dad on the ranch. He'd part chaser or whatever. He'd go get parts in town for him, but Pappy used to always say, Uncle Tom would say, everything's broke as hell, and
Uncle Tom was a chain smoker, and they diagnosed him, I guess it was emphysema, and told him, but he never quit. He'd have his cigarettes and his oxygen tank, going at the same time. But he'd run. He was their parts runner, and he'd go to Phoenix to pick up parts. And I remember one time he got stopped on the freeway for going too slow.
but Uncle
Trying to
Tom,
go faster.
Uncle Tom taught me how to drive, and he used to come and get me. And one of his tasks, working for Pappy, he'd drive the feed truck and go feed the cows and empty the feed into the trough as they went by. And when I was probably 9 years old, Uncle Tom started letting me drive the truck, and I couldn't reach the clutch or anything, but he'd let me do all the steering. Then eventually we got driving pickup, and I was pretty much driving all over Queen Creek when I was 12, so.
Bob taught me how to drive. Do you remember teaching me how to drive? He had a 55 Chevy with
There's
a
no
stick
liability
shift.
involved here, is there?
I don't think so. but nobody else had the patience to teach me, so Bob taught me.
My first car was a 37 Studebaker. And it had solid rubber tires on it. And I got it as a gift from Jerry Skousen, because I wouldn't dance at the dances. And he said, if you'll dance, I'll give you a car. And so I bit
Is
my
that a
tongue
true
and I
story?
did.
No, I never heard
And
this
he gave me
story.
that car. And I had it for a lot of years, and I really loved it.
What car did you shoot the hole in the roof?
That was a 52 Chevy coupe.
Chevy.
Well, that's not really important. I didn't do it.
Yeah,
We used to like to hunt a lot,
it
and
wasn't me.
I had a good friend of mine, Claire Edwards.
Claire Edwards.
And he wanted to go hunting. And I quizzed him, could you know how to shoot? Can you handle a gun? Yeah. We was driving out there and boom, and he shot a hole right through the roof of the car. Didn't make a very big hole.
Then you built a car out of that
Oh,
fuel
I'm
tank?
a fuel tank. Max helped me do that.
Yeah.
One of
We
the
found
things,
a jettison fuel tank off of the jets
airplane?
out on the desert. We brought it in and knocked the dents out of it and built a car out of it.
It was
And,
quite a car, I remember that car.
Stopped real good.
They had a little trouble with the braking system.
I remember running off in a bar ditch.
back to Uncle Tom, a story about him that I remember Nonnie saying is that we talked about him being a chain smoker all the time. He'd always say quit,
Yeah.
and he was gonna quit, and he'd start coming to church a little bit. But Nonnie used to have a saying, she'd say, Tom, says, smoke and the world smokes with you, quit and you smoke alone. She
That's pretty true.
used to say that about Uncle Tom.
He
I
said
thought
he
that was
had-
pretty funny.
He really did okay as long as he was smoking and could carry his cigarettes in his shirt pocket. But when he quit, he had to carry them in his hip pocket. And every time he sat down, he smashed them all down.
Talk about a lady with patience, that was Aunt Retta.
Yeah, Retta was a saint.
Saint, let me tell you.
Really a sweet lady, and Uncle Tom wasn't bad.
No, he's character.
If you want me to describe him, I'd say he's the Cy of our family.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You ever watch
He was
Duck Dynasty? He's Uncle Cy.
He's Uncle Cy.
He
Watch
was
that
our
guy.
Uncle Cy.
That's so true. Maybe that's why I love Cy so much.
That's Uncle Tom? Yeah.
Because of Uncle Tom. But we used to, as kids, would, I don't know, nowadays the kids would probably walk up, but we'd ride the school bus from Queen Creek School down, and they'd let us off right in front of Aunt Retta's house. And so we always had to stop there and get a piece of pie, or she always had made something every
She
single day.
fed all the kids after school.
We'd go there and have chocolate cake or piece of pie or something before we'd go the rest of the trek down
And
to
then
our house.
When June and I, and Bob too, they stayed with us a lot while
Yeah.
Nonnie and Pappy were traveling.
They'd babysit.
So they'd come down and stay with us. And I was born in 1940 at the Mesa Southside Hospital, and delivered by Dr. Kent. I think probably all of us were delivered by Dr. Kent, and he was our family doctor for years and years till he retired. And the first home that I remember in Queen Creek was a house there, which is now kind of down in the middle of Queen Creek by the old post office. And it's not there anymore, but I remember that as a kid. I remember when I was real little, Nonnie doing the laundry in the backyard, boiling the water on in a big tub in the backyard, and had a ringer machine out there. And I remember the phone was a crank phone, which was a party line. And of course there was no TV or anything, but my first memories of living in Queen Creek were in that house until we moved to Chandler. And then we moved to Chandler when I was in second grade. But anyway, that's a different story. But Bob talks about how he loved to go out on the farm and do all this stuff. Well, I didn't. I didn't like to get dirty, and I didn't like to sweat. And so I wasn't a real willing, I mean, I didn't mind it, but it was a great life. It was a good way to grow up, but coming along at a different time, we didn't get involved with, or at least June and I, we let a little more protect. Juna went out with Pappy more than I did. She was kind of a tomboy. We had horses, and I rode horses a little bit, but I kind of could have cared less. But Nonnie found every lesson in the world for June and I to take. We took elocution, we took piano, we took organ, we took voice. What else did we take?
We took dancing.
Dance. Oh yeah, we
Elocution lessons.
We did lots of stuff.
Drama.
But I just found a journal that Nonnie had written, and all she talks about in the journal is her driving June and I around. I mean, that's what it was in 1954. I think that journal is, and she was driving us everywhere. But early recollections of Queen Creek School. It was not a very big school, you know. We kind of there was the farm families and people that worked on the farms, and that was pretty much who was out there.
I was born December 21st, 1942, and I always said I think I was the little boy that Pappy wanted, so I grew up kind of as a tomboy. No, for the baby. He was hoping I would be a boy, Nonnie said, so he was glad that I liked to go with him. But my earliest recollections of Queen Creek were, I have a few memories of the house that was by the post office. That's where I got my nickname. DeLoss got to call me Junebug because I'd sit out under that tree and tie strings onto the June bugs and let them fly around my head. And that's when DeLoss started calling me Junebug. I have vivid memories of going down to the store and buying bread and milk for Nonnie and Twinkies for a nickel, and just kind of grew up spoiled because we would just go in the store and get anything we wanted and sign a ticket. And Maggie
cut me off.
Maggie Martin ran the store, and so she finally would make sure that Nonnie knew that what we were doing, because we were buying soda pop and all kinds of stuff.
We weren't using the script then. They had changed
No,
over
changed
to
it to money when
U.S. dollar.
when I was there, when I got old enough to remember. But my vivid memories in Queen Creek are of the ward and building the chapel out there, and what a fun time in our lives that was, because I remember in the evenings they'd gather and all the men would come and work, and the women would bring potluck and would work till dark, and the kids would play, and that was in the days that they built the chapels themselves. And I have a lot of fond memories of that. And the one thing that sticks out in my mind is the road shows that the Queen Creek Ward always put on. They would have contests in those days, and you'd literally pack the show up in your car and go around to the different buildings and perform. And Queen Creek always had by far the most talented and
It's always
best. We had Uncle Johnny and Carolyn and the cousins and everybody that were musically talented, and we by far were the best of all the road shows every year.
Nonnie, when June and I were growing up, always dressed us alike, or most of the time we dressed alike. I don't know why exactly, but we did.
Everybody thought we were twins.
Yeah, a lot of ruffles, and that tells you why we're like we are today. But we used to. There was no place to shop around, close to home. But Nonnie used to go to Goldwater's down on Central Avenue, the old original Goldwater store, and shop there. And I think you've seen that picture of Bob and Pappy and Nonnie shopping in downtown Phoenix.
Diamonds.
And there was one sales lady that always waited on her. So do you want to pick it up from here?
Well, she just made an agreement with this lady that she said she opened a charge account with them, and so every time they'd get a shipment of something new in the little girls department,
In our sizes,
this lady would just send them to ship us to them in Queen Creek, and so that's how we got our clothes. And we were kind of spoiled, I guess, when it.
Pappy would just roll his eyes.
But we always had the latest fashions and
We were quite
dressed
fashion
to
forward
kill.
for Queen Creek. Pappy was bishop forever. I mean, as long as I can remember. He was bishop in my earliest recollection. And that's one of the reasons we moved to Chandler, I think, when we built that house in Queen Creek, because he was in Chandler all the time at the church. We bought a house, or they rented, I don't know if they bought it or rented it. Rented a house right across the street from the church, because Pappy was bishop, and I was in 2nd grade. The church in Chandler was on Buffalo Street, and we they rented a house right across the street, so Pappy would be close to church, because he was bishop. And I think I was in 2nd grade. I went to 2nd grade in Chandler, so however old I was.
We only lived there for 1 year.
1 year.
Because it was a lot harder for Pappy to commute to work every day to Queen Creek than it was for him to live in Queen Creek and commute to Chandler to be the bishop.
So you never went to school in Chandler then?
So
I could clarify
Just high
that a
school.
little. I went to the 5th grade at Chandler, and our home on Buffalo Street was down on the corner about a block away from the chapel. But right after we got there, the end of that year, they released Pappy and called him to be stake president of the new stake that was split off from and called the Mesa stake instead of the Maricopa stake. And so he built a home, him and Nonnie, and we all moved back out to Queen Creek.
that's when they built the red brick house that's still there next to City Hall.
And I think I was 8 when we moved out there.
And I was a freshman in high school.
I was 6.
That
when we
would
moved
add
into
up.
that
I
house.
was 8, you were 6.
At that time, the story they tell about him being called is that some of the stake people came out to visit with him to issue him a call to be the bishop. And now you have to remember, it's a long ways from Queen Creek to Chandler, but we were all the same ward. And Pappy told him, I have to consult with my brothers, I'm their partner, and we've got a big place here. They were farming at least 10,000 acres. And so I can't just accept a call without consulting with them. And so when he went to talk to him, he said Uncle Leo looked at him and said, some people are made to sweat and swear, and others are made to pray and preach, and you're the latter. You go ahead and accept the call and we'll back you up. And so from then on, Pappy spent probably half his time at least doing church work. First as the bishop, then as the stake president. And then they split the Mesa stake and he was stake president of Mesa East stake after they moved into Mesa. And so he had a big church calling all the rest of his life.
President Lowell Wright come to the farm and called him. I can remember that, just barely.
Well, Pappy said, history I read, he said he was out on the tractor, and they
He
came
went
out,
out to the field, yeah, he
They
walked
came
out
out
in the field and talked to him.
talked to him.
Most of the time, all of the time that he was bishop of Chandler Ward, there was 2 meetings on Sunday. We went in the morning and went to Sunday school and Priesthood and Relief Society. And then we went back in the evening to sacrament meeting.
Not to Relief Society. Relief Society was on Tuesdays or Thursdays.
Yeah, that's right. Relief Society and primary was the middle of the
During
week.
the middle of the week.
And so, I don't know about these girls, but I never did attend primary because we couldn't make another trip into town for us to go to primary during the middle of the week. But I know lots of times they would leave all of us kids home instead of taking us back in there in the evening to sacrament meeting. And I was babysitting the kids one night when they were gone to sacrament meeting and they were out shoveling in the dirt and somebody hit Marg in the face with a shovel.
No, you know when that happened? That was when the fire down at when the gas station burned down, and I walked by just as they were cleaning it up, and a guy hit me in the chin with a shovel.
But I remember one of the neighbors taking me and
To the
going
hospital.
into sacrament meeting and getting Nonnie out so she could take her to the doctor. Wow.
That explains a lot, Mark.
Does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
At least you have an excuse.
I don't know, I think Nonnie was not, she was always very supportive and
Very supportive.
she spent a lot of time driving back and forth with him and then taking care of things at home when he wasn't there. And it was a lot of sacrifice for both of them. I mean, I was just reading a journal that she kept, and it's all about them driving back and forth to meetings or driving us clear to Chandler and Mesa for lessons. And, you know, it just, and transportation was not what it is now. The roads were not that great, but there wasn't any traffic either. But they spent a good part of their life on the road, and she was very, very supportive of it.
I think I learned to be a warrior from Nonnie and Pappy driving back and forth to
Me too.
meetings all the time, because I used to worry about them driving between Queen Creek and Mesa at night all the time to meetings and was afraid something might happen to them. And I have vivid memories of that, of just laying in bed worrying about them, hoping they get home all right. So when Pappy served as the stake president for so many years, but we entertained so many of the general authorities, and the brethren would come to our house for the state conference and would stay there. And they would always, Bob would get booted out of his bedroom when they were there because they would stay back in that part of the house. But we ought to write down who they were. But I remember Ezra Taft Benson and S. Dilworth Young, and but did Delbert Stapley stay there? Who all came and stayed there?
It was a whole list.
I know a lot of them.
There were so many of them
I-
that stayed there. Did Joseph Fielding Smith stay there? He and
David O. McKay did.
Dave, yeah. And Marg and Nonnie would always fix food for them. She was the next entertainer.
I
President
think,
Moyle, President Benson.
yeah,
President Benson was real close to Pappy. They were real good friends.
I think now if Nonnie had cooking for all those people, that would have scared me to death.
Yeah.
But she always had all sorts of food for him.
She was an excellent hostess. She would take
In
care.
that book of the letters, there's several letters from general authorities thanking them for the food and thanking them for the picnic. Nonnie packed for them to eat on the way home.
Yeah, that was before they could fly back and forth. And then, but Marg and I always would be the cleanup crew.
I think back
And,
now, and I'm just really aggravated that I didn't appreciate it more.
We
You know, it's
we
like-
were pretty amazing, I thought, for 12, 14-year-olds to clean up after everything. But
Did a lot
Nonnie
of
always
dishes.
had to have that chandelier polished, and
We didn't eat on paper plates either. I can
no,
tell you that.
Nonnie always had her finest china. And Pappy was the state president for 11 years, I think, of
2 different states.
2 different states, the Mesa State and the Mesa East
East
State.
Mesa State.
East Mesa State. And when I was going to BYU, between my freshman and sophomore year, they had released Pappy from being in the state presidency and called him to serve on the General Church Welfare Committee. Harold B. Lee was president of the church at the time, and he asked Pappy and Nonnie if they'd moved to Salt Lake, and Nonnie had just bought that new house, the one that he bought from Tom Stapley, Tom and
Okay.
Elaine Stapley. And Nonnie had just had it decorated to the hilt when they got that calling, and so they put that house on the market and moved to Salt Lake and bought Harold B. Lee's home, where they had just moved into a new home because of Sister Lee's health. And I remember that home fondly because I dropped out of BYU and came up and lived with them and went to LDS Business College and lived there in that house. And that was a real memorable time in my life.
After they left Queen Creek, after we were all married, or except Juna, Nonnie started collecting houses. In fact, they moved more the last 10 years of their married or 15 years of their married life than they had the rest of the time combined. And Pappy, Nonnie had a real knack for decorating and doing it right. Pappy used to just roll his eyes, and whatever makes her happy, and he just would, you know. But she loved living in Salt Lake.
They lived in that home on Connor Street. And Pappy was gone all the time, and Nonnie really enjoyed it because at first we were worried about her because she was home alone so much because he was gone every weekend. But people in the ward, for the first time in Nonnie's life, they didn't know Pappy. A lot of people thought her husband was inactive or something because he was never at church. And she was called to be the Relief Society president, but she felt like she had her own friends and she was known.
She kind of found her own identity.
Because of herself, you know, and she felt more like
She said one
identity.
time she was either somebody's wife or somebody's mother. She'd never been just herself.
And she really had to be on her own a lot. And she and I would spend a lot of weekends there by ourselves, but invariably it seemed like it would snow too when Pappy was gone and not there to shovel snow. But after that house, she bought a house just a little further to the east up by the zoo that was a newer home. And then she decided they wanted to buy a ranch up in Colville. You know, Colville is just up above Park City a little ways. And they bought a beautiful piece of land there right on the river that comes through Colville. I think it's the Weaver River. And it was fun because one year, I think it was Kent and Brent and Paul, they came out and spent several weeks. And we have a picture, Jerry just took them down by the river and they got in this mud fight. And those boys are just covered. I know there's pictures around of them.
That ranch about wore Nonnie out because there was always grandkids there. She always had a house full of
somebody
kids.
there. But
And they kind of built the house so they could have the kids were all pretty little. Your first three were the only grandkids for a while. Well, Brent was born in 54, Karen 53, but
DeLoss,
Marlene,
they didn't live here. DeLoss was in the service. He was in the
in
Army.
El Paso.
So
When
my
Brent was
older
born.
three kids stayed with Nonnie and Pappy a lot. And they were there a lot.
And we had them at our house as much as they were at their house probably.
yeah. But the kids, they also love to go to their place in Shoal.
Yeah.
And that's, my kids have such fond memories of driving up there with Pappy.
The back of the pickup, and man, if he did that today. But he'd throw all those kids in the back of the pickup and they'd go up and down the hills and the kids, he'd go to a hill and then, or there was a dip and he'd see how fast he could go down, you remember. And the kids are on the back of the pickup, with their hands up in the air. They were all pretty little.
But Pappy was so loved by the brethren in the church, and I don't know that you kids realize it, all of you, but when he was called, he was on the General Church Welfare Committee, and he traveled around with the General Authority every weekend to go to a state conference. And then, after that, he was called to serve on with the original group of regional representatives when they put that into effect. And so then he would travel around as a regional rep. He served on the church correlation committee when they started the whole home teaching thing and the idea that each organization needed to teach the same, be on the same page instead of everybody. So he really had a lot of responsibility when he was in Salt Lake, and the brethren they loved him to death. And he was such good friends with Harold B. Lee and Elder Benson, Elder Hunter, President Hunter, and he were very good friends. He and Elder Hunter had gone to a state conference in Texas. I think it was in Houston. And they arrived Saturday afternoon because they had church welfare meetings with the state presidency. And they rented a car at the airport and drove to the church where they were supposed to have their meeting. And the church was just locked up. There was nobody there. And he said that they went and found a telephone and called the state president. And stake president said, they said, why isn't there anybody here for the meetings? Did you change the location? And the president said, no, I just figured that we knew all of this stuff already, that we didn't need to have a meeting. Well, President Hunter just came unglued, and he said, Brother Ellsworth, I want you to come. And he told the state president, he says, I want to get you and your counselors, and I want you to be at the church in X number of minutes. And Dad said he was just boiling. And state president came and his counselors, and he said, President Hunter had me tell him everything I knew within an hour. He said I didn't know much, but on the church welfare committee from the top to the bottom and their responsibilities. And I taught him all that I knew, and he says, Brother Ellsworth, you're dismissed. And he said, you can go to, they were staying at a member's home. So they went, Pappy went back to the room, and he said it was the wee hours of the morning. President Hunter came in, back to the room, and he said, walked into the room, and he said, that state president will never do that again. He says, I taught him everything about everything I knew till he knows it backwards and forwards. And he said he knows now that he'll never, ever again cancel a meeting.
When Pappy was called first to serve on the welfare committee, then it was done with great sacrifice and without question. Then Uncle Lawrence and Uncle Leo both were called. And that's when they organized and just left. I can remember when Elder Moyle made the call to them. And it was very sudden, and to give them 60 days to get their work in order, or affairs in order, and come to work the rest of the year for the church. The thing that I remember the most was their dedication. That it mattered not what they had going. They had an empire started and was very successful, but they gave it all up to go to work for the rest of the year for nothing for the church. I can remember at the time I was doing other things, and Pappy told me, you need to come back. You need to be here. That when they had a call from the Lord, they left everything they had and assumed the responsibilities.
And I was so surprised to see Uncle Leo and Uncle Lawrence be willing to serve. Uncle Lawrence, they had him developing that Cedar Valley farm. Well, Pappy served in the capacity of the General Welfare Committee and as the regional representative for the church. And then when he was released from that calling, I think this is the right order, they asked the three brothers to manage these various welfare farms throughout the church. Uncle Lawrence moved to Utah, and he was working. The church owns a lot of property in Cedar Valley, which is just north of the point of the mountain. It's where Eagle Mountain is now, is how it's developed. For those of you, I don't know if any of you know. But Uncle Lawrence was kind of responsible for that. Pappy had the Goshen, that farm out. What was that? Alberta project. And he kind of oversaw that. And then Uncle Lawrence went to Florida. And we thought, Uncle Leo went to Florida, and we thought he'd just be there for a year, and he ended up living the rest of his life there. And all of that
Did he go to Florida or Georgia?
Georgia and Florida, I don't.
Both.
He was living in Georgia when we got married.
And
I
he and
remember that.
Uncle Leo ended up just staying there and developing a lot of his own land, and not all of that years was spent in church service, but a whole lot of it was.
When that happened, Bob, is that when they split up Ellsworth Brothers?
No, they split it up just prior to that.
Somebody took the sheep, somebody took the cattle, and
I know for our dad, at least, for Pappy, that when they issued a call, there was never any hesitation whether he was gonna do it or not. That they just did it.
I
They
don't,
made sacrifices.
I don't know how many years Pappy served on the General Welfare Committee, but he did go with the General Authority to conferences all over the world. They went to England, Nonnie went with him, and they spoke in state conferences all over the United States. And so he taught the world about what the welfare program of the church was. When Nonnie got sick and had to have more care and not be alone, and we were trying to decide, I know at the hospital they gave me a list of nursing homes that were approved that we could put her in because she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And as I went home and prayed about it and talked it over with Max, I could hear in my head a sermon that Pappy taught in welfare committee meetings, in welfare meetings, that said, I don't know why a parent spends 20-some years raising their children and taking care of their children, and a child cannot take 2 or 3 years out of their life to take care of their parents in old age. That was the guiding thing that I felt compelled that I had to step in and take care of her. And that was because of Pappy's firm belief that it's the family's responsibility to take care of the family, no matter what age. And so if he taught the whole church, it taught his family the same principles, and I'll be ever grateful for that.
Well, I think as the family, we're ever grateful for you and Max for doing what you did, because it certainly, she lived the last few years of her life in a peaceful manner and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to take care of her, and it was really difficult. So I don't know what we would have done without you guys.
She would say, you promised you'd never put me in a nursing home. And I'd say, Nonnie, you're in our home, you're not in a nursing home. And she would say, it looks awful suspicious to me. So you wonder if they really appreciated it, but I know she did.
Well, I know
If she didn't in this life, she will in the next.
she did in this life too. If she'd really been in a nursing home, it'd have been a whole different story.
The thing that I know most about my parents is they lived the law of concentration the way that we've been taught to live it. They gave everything they had, they devoted everything they had when they were called on to do it. And I'll always be grateful to Max and Carolyn for the way they took care of my mother in the twilight of her life. I know it wasn't hard, it wasn't easy for them. I had some disagreements with Max, nothing major, but at the time that he did this, all of that was erased. And I've emulated his experience and carried him as a badge of honor of knowing him for what he did to help take care of Nonnie. The thing that I will always remember and carry throughout my life is my father's willingness to serve his Father in heaven. When he was called to serve on the welfare committee and then as a general authority, I would go up to take documents for his signature on the farm. And every trip, his office would just be right down the hall from President Kimball's. And he said, I told President Kimball my farmer was coming up. And he said, when you get here, we be sure want to say hello to him. And I've always appreciated that ability or that experience to meet with these general authorities because of my dad. And I'll always remember how they revered him and honored him and respect him. President Moyle told me one time while I was there at one of these visits that your dad will go down on record in the annals of the church of making more money for the church, anyone before or after. I thought that was great. He was president of ConocoPhillips before he was called to serve. And I thought from a great business leader in our country at that time, that was a great thing. He was meaning the acquisition that they'd made through agriculture projects in Florida, Georgia, all through the Midwest, California, Washington, Oregon, Argentina. And as they build these new temples and dedicate them around the church, I hear those words of President Moyle telling me. And thinking at the time he was being overstated slightly, but I knew that it mattereth not the amount of money that Pappy had in the bank. He could care less. And I could remember his total dedication to the Lord and his testimony for helping to build a kingdom on earth. He felt like that was his sole purpose, to do whatever the Lord wanted him to do to help build a kingdom. And I admire that characteristic, and it's the same type of characteristic that I've tried to embed in my sons and family, and I'm grateful for that experience. It's a very unique experience that he had provided me in this life, he and my mother. I know that it was a great sacrifice for Nonnie when they moved to Salt Lake, because she was alone so much. And she handled it well and honorably. So there's a deep knowledge and a faith and a strength that I get from my lineage that I'll be eternally grateful for.
And Nonnie and Pappy were such an influence on all of our lives and our children's lives that I will always be grateful for them. When I look back now at the sacrifices they made for each one of us as kids, and later on and how much they helped our children and their grandchildren, it's just overwhelming to me. If I had even 1/10 of the strength that they showed to us and for us, I would just think I was really, I would be very grateful for that. And one of the things that I talked to Liz a little bit about this, is that in those days, they were never big on saying, I love you out loud. I mean, they would never walk like we do with our kids now and say, I love you. They just didn't do that, and it was just a sign of the times. But there was never a time in my life that I didn't know that they absolutely loved each one of their children and grandchildren. And they would sacrifice and do anything that they could for us. Pappy was always very, very humble. And I remember one time he bought a Cadillac, and he didn't drive it very long because I think it was when he was state president, and he could afford it, but he thought it was ostentatious, that he shouldn't be driving a Cadillac, that he should be either driving a Chevy or an Oldsmobile, because that was just a show of wealth that he didn't think he should do, should show. And he was always very, very conscious of that. And Nonnie was such an example to me, and I don't know how she did some of the things she did. as far as taking care of us. She was tireless in working and supporting. She never once that I know of ever wavered in supporting Pappy and in his church callings, and then in her church callings. She had some very big church callings, and she honored them and did them without question, and they were both tireless in their service. I think one of the things that I will ever be grateful for is their humbleness and their love for each one of us, and for helping us to become the people we are today. And I just hope to be able to some way convey this to my children. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this today was to convey to our children and grandchildren what great heritage they came from. And some of the grandchildren don't remember Nonnie and Pappy at all, and I would like to have this as a history for them to be able to not only appreciate things as they were in the days gone by, but to show what great lineage that they came from. And I'll always be grateful for that. Can I say one more thing about Nonnie? Errol always said he had the best mother-in-law in the world. And I know that Nonnie didn't always approve of things he did, but she would never, ever interfere or say anything bad about him or to him or about him, to me or to his children. And she was always welcoming, and I mean, he loved her. So when June is saying they're watching us, I think he's there with them too.
Yeah. I tell my kids that I think that I lived a charmed childhood because things were perfect, and as far as I was concerned, and I just remember fondly the times that we had in Queen Creek, and the great example again that Pappy and Nonnie made the church as a central part of our lives. And being taught by Pappy at an early age that you never say no to a church calling, and I always have thought of that through the various callings that I've had, and some that maybe you didn't want, but Pappy just would all preach that to us, that you always have to say yes. And he certainly taught that to us in his, not only by word, but in deed, that his willingness to serve. Nonnie was incredible. I think one of the things that the grandchildren need to know about Nonnie is she had a great sense of humor, and she loved to play pranks on people too. She and her friends had some pretty fun times together. But I love Nonnie and Pappy, and they just taught me so much in my life, and I have tried to emulate my own family and bring the closeness together with all the cousins and everything that Nonnie and Pappy worked so hard to do during their life on this earth with their own grandkids. They would have done anything for any one of us, and to care for us and let us know that we're loved and taken care of. But again, they weren't selfish in any way. They would give. I always remember Pappy when we'd come and visit from Utah, and he would always make sure that he'd get up and pack us a lunch to take with us when we were on the way home, and afraid that we were going to get hungry between here and Provo. And it was always so sweet. But my grandkids are always saying, "Grandma, you're always sending food home with us." And I think that we all have developed those certain traits that we learned from our parents, and who set such a good example. But I'm grateful for Mother and Dad and for the testimony that they instilled in me and in my life, that I have felt that without their example and help and strength growing up and setting an example for the church and affording every opportunity that they could afford each one of us to strengthen our testimonies and to be strong in the gospel and to serve, that was the most important thing that Pappy and Nonnie wanted to strive for. And I think that they are smiling now because I think that they see a family that's close, and we love each other, and I think we all have testimonies of the gospel that that's the center part of our lives, and that we're grateful for eternal families and the opportunity that we're all going to be together again when we leave this life. And I look forward to that day that I can see them again and thank them properly for everything that they taught me and that I learned from them and have tried to emulate in my life. And I thank Mark for having us today and for the opportunity that we've had to express and to go back and think about things in our childhood that formed us and made us the people that we are today. And it was certainly all encompassing of whether our childhood in Queen Creek or what phase of life that we went through with Mother and Dad, that they had such a huge, huge influence in our lives. And I'm so grateful to my Heavenly Father for them and for everything that they did for me. And I'd like to end this today by just saying amen. I think it's been great, and I can't wait to see it all. So
The last turn off the camera.